Welcome back to Rapid Report, your go-to source for breaking news, in-depth analysis, and the stories that shape our world. Today, we're diving into a historic moment that could redefine the 2024 election and the limits of presidential power. The U.S. Supreme Court has just delivered a ruling that effectively ends former President Donald Trump's legal strategy to delay his criminal trial. In a move echoing the famous United States v. Nixon case of 1974, the justices, without dissent, denied Trump's request for immunity-based delay, sending the case back to the trial judge. What does this mean for the former president, his allies, and the 2024 presidential race? Could this decision be the turning point that reshapes American politics? In today's episode, we'll break it all down. The legal implications, the accelerated trial timeline, the pressure on witnesses, and the unprecedented impact on voters. Stay with us, because you won't want to miss a single detail of this unfolding story. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon to get instant alerts for all our updates. And if you find our analysis valuable, don't forget to like and share this video so your friends and family stay informed. U.S. Supreme Court ends Trump's legal delay tactics, echoes Nixon-era lessons in a decisive move that could reshape the political and legal landscape of the United States. The U.S. Supreme Court has effectively dismantled former President Donald Trump's long-standing strategy to avoid a criminal trial by postponing proceedings. By refusing to intervene in his attempt to pause the immunity case, the court has signaled that even the justices appointed by Trump are unwilling to grant him the extraordinary legal protections he sought. This moment has been framed by legal analysts as both historically significant and politically consequential, drawing stark parallels to the 1974 landmark case United States v. Nixon. Historical parallels to Nixon. Nearly half a century ago, President Richard Nixon faced an unprecedented legal challenge as the Watergate scandal unfolded. Nixon, believing in the near-absolute power of the presidency, assumed that the Supreme Court justices he appointed would shield him from judicial scrutiny. The court, however, unanimously rejected this argument, affirming that no individual, including the president, was above the law. Nixon's attempt to delay the release of subpoenaed tapes was denied, and the ruling set the stage for his eventual resignation. Trump's current legal situation mirrors Nixon's in several ways. Like Nixon, Trump appeared to rely on the assumption that the justices he personally appointed would offer him protection against the judicial process. His legal strategy revolved almost entirely around delaying trial proceedings until after the 2024 presidential election, creating the possibility that he could avoid facing the consequences of criminal allegations while campaigning for a second term. Yet, as history has shown, the Supreme Court is often guided by principle and precedent rather than personal loyalty. Supreme Court denies Trump's delay request. In a brief, unsigned order issued without oral arguments, the Supreme Court denied Trump's request to pause the immunity case. The order returned the matter to the trial judge, effectively allowing the criminal process to move forward. The significance of this action cannot be overstated. It ends the former president's legal strategy of using immunity claims to delay proceedings and puts the timeline for the trial firmly back under judicial control. The court's refusal to grant a stay underscores a clear message. Even in politically charged cases involving a former president, the judicial system can act independently and decisively. By issuing a concise order with no oral argument and no accompanying dissent, the court signals its determination to uphold the rule of law rather than engage in procedural theatrics. No dissents from conservative justices. One of the most striking aspects of the Supreme Court's ruling is the absence of any dissent, including from conservative justices appointed by Trump himself. This silence sends a powerful signal that the immunity argument advanced by Trump's legal team is considered extreme, even by those who may share his ideological leanings. The lack of dissent not only reinforces the authority of the court, but also demonstrates that partisan affiliation does not automatically dictate judicial decision-making, particularly in cases with profound constitutional implications. trial timeline accelerates. With the Supreme Court's denial, the case is back in the hands of the trial judge, setting the stage for an accelerated timeline. Jury selection could potentially begin as early as late summer, and a verdict may be reached before Election Day in 2024. This acceleration has profound implications. A presidential candidate could face a criminal trial while actively campaigning, a scenario unprecedented in modern American history. The acceleration also places pressure on the court system, prosecutors, and witnesses to proceed without the protective delay Trump had hoped for. For prosecutors, the ruling strengthens their position, as they can continue to gather evidence, subpoena witnesses, and move toward trial without interference. Pressure on Trump's allies and witnesses. The court's decision has immediate implications for Trump's inner circle. Co-conspirators and potential witnesses can no longer rely on procedural delays to shield them from cooperating with investigators. Analysts suggest that the denial effectively increases the incentives for those in Trump's orbit to testify, negotiate plea deals, or provide critical evidence, creating a rush for lifeboats scenario within his political and personal network. This pressure may also affect the strategy of Trump's legal team, which had heavily relied on controlling the narrative through delays. With the trial timeline accelerated, the defense must prepare to confront evidence and testimony directly, potentially leaving less room for strategic maneuvering in the run-up to the election. Impact on the 2024 election. The Supreme Court's ruling introduces an unprecedented variable into the 2024 election cycle. For the first time, a major party candidate could face criminal trial proceedings during a presidential campaign. Media coverage of court proceedings, legal filings, and witness testimony is likely to dominate the news cycle, ensuring that voters are exposed to critical information before casting their ballots. Political analysts predict that this development may reshape campaign strategies, with candidates, parties, and voters forced to account for the legal context in which the election is unfolding. By preventing indefinite delays, the Supreme Court has ensured that key facts may be known to the electorate, preserving the integrity of the democratic process. A potential historical turning point. Legal scholars and historians are already framing this moment as a potential turning point in American governance. The Supreme Court's refusal to accommodate Trump's delay tactics represents a reassertion of institutional authority and a reinforcement of the principle that no individual, regardless of office or influence, is above the law. The denial not only accelerates the criminal trial, but also reshapes the trajectory of the 2024 election and may be remembered as a moment when American institutions held firm against attempts to manipulate legal processes for political gain. For Trump, the ruling is a devastating setback, dismantling a defense strategy built entirely around the hope of procedural delay. In conclusion, the Supreme Court's decision marks a watershed moment. The judiciary has reestablished its independence. The criminal trial is now inevitable, and the political landscape of the United States enters uncharted territory as voters prepare to face a presidential election influenced by legal proceedings against a former president. Just as United States versus Nixon defined the limits of presidential power in 1974, today's ruling may similarly define the boundaries of legal accountability for political leaders in the 21st century. Legal implications. Presidential immunity under scrutiny. The Supreme Court's denial underscores a fundamental question in U.S. constitutional law. To what extent can a sitting or former president claim immunity from criminal proceedings? Historically, presidential immunity has been narrowly construed, primarily to protect official acts, not personal conduct. Trump's legal team argued that criminal prosecution could interfere with his ability to campaign or function as a candidate, effectively seeking a temporal immunity tied to the electoral cycle. By rejecting this argument, the Supreme Court reinforces a critical precedent. Immunity cannot be weaponized as a shield for delay. Unlike Nixon, whose immunity claim centered on official communications, Trump's appeal relied heavily on procedural maneuvering. The court's refusal signals that such tactics are unlikely to succeed, setting a legal framework that may influence future cases involving high-ranking officials. Moreover, the ruling clarifies the separation of powers in a politically charged environment. Even with justices appointed by the former president, the court chose principle over perceived loyalty. This reinforces public confidence in judicial impartiality and signals that the judiciary is willing to intervene in politically sensitive matters when constitutional limits are at stake. Political ramifications, the election in a legal storm. The ruling introduces an unprecedented dynamic into the 2024 election. For the first time, a major party candidate may face a criminal trial while actively campaigning. This situation raises complex questions. Can voters fairly assess a candidate who is under indictment? How will campaign messaging evolve when legal proceedings dominate media coverage? And how will political opponents leverage these developments in strategy and debate? Political analysts suggest the ruling could shift the electoral calculus. If trial proceedings extend into the campaign, voter perceptions may be influenced not just by policy positions but by the legal credibility of candidates. Fundraising, endorsements, and coalition building may also be affected as party leaders hedge bets on candidates whose legal fates remain uncertain. Furthermore, the decision pressures political institutions, including both parties, to prepare for contingencies. Election officials, media outlets, and campaign strategists must now navigate an environment where judicial developments directly intersect with electoral politics, potentially altering turnout and voter behavior. Societal and institutional consequences. Beyond the legal and political realms, the ruling carries broader societal significance. It serves as a test of the resilience of American institutions in a polarized environment. By denying Trump's delay request, the Supreme Court reinforces the principle that the rule of law applies equally to all, regardless of political stature. This decision may also influence public trust in governance. Supporters of the rule of law see it as evidence that the judiciary can act independently, even under intense political pressure. Detractors, however, may interpret the ruling through a partisan lens, viewing the court's intervention as a factor in election outcomes. Managing this perception is a challenge for democratic institutions, highlighting the delicate balance between legal authority and public confidence. Implications for Trump's legal strategy. With the denial in hand, Trump's legal team faces a stark reality. The path to delaying trial beyond the election is closed. The accelerated timeline pressures defense attorneys to prepare for immediate trial, possibly forcing strategic compromises. Witness testimony previously expected to be postponed may now proceed under significant scrutiny, increasing exposure to damaging evidence. The ruling may also catalyze shifts in alliances. Individuals in Trump's orbit, from campaign officials to business associates, now confront stronger incentives to cooperate with prosecutors. Legal analysts compare this to a cascade effect, where pressure on a few key witnesses can reshape the entire narrative of the trial. Historical and global significance. Historically, this ruling may be viewed alongside landmark cases that tested the limits of presidential authority. Just as United States v. Nixon redefined executive privilege and accountability, the Supreme Court's action in 2026 could set a lasting precedent regarding the intersection of criminal law and electoral politics. Globally, the decision sends a clear signal about the strength of U.S. democratic institutions. In an era when political leaders around the world increasingly test legal boundaries, the court's refusal to accommodate delay reinforces the notion that judicial oversight remains a cornerstone of American democracy. The end of delay, the beginning of accountability. In sum, the Supreme Court's denial represents more than a procedural setback for Trump. It is a reaffirmation of the rule of law, a recalibration of political strategy, and a historical milestone in American governance. The decision accelerates the trial timeline, reshapes the 2024 election, and places unprecedented legal and political pressure on a former president and his allies. This moment may well be remembered as the point when institutions reasserted their authority over political ambition, demonstrating that even the most powerful figures are subject to legal accountability. For Trump, it signals the end of delay tactics and the beginning of a confrontation with justice that may define the legacy of his post-presidential years. And that wraps up our in-depth coverage of the Supreme Court's ruling on Trump's criminal trial delay. This decision marks a pivotal moment in U.S. history, a reminder that no one is above the law, and a development that will shape the 2024 election in ways we are only beginning to understand. We'll continue to follow this story closely, bringing you expert analysis, courtroom updates, and political insights as events unfold. If you want to stay informed with breaking news and thoughtful commentary on the stories that matter most, make sure to subscribe to Rapid Report. Smash that like button if you found this breakdown helpful, and share this video so others can stay in the loop. And we want to hear from you. What do you think this ruling means for the election and for American democracy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for watching Rapid Report, where every story is analyzed, explained, and brought straight to you. Stay informed, stay empowered, and we'll see you in the next update.